The media have a new eye-catching term for the Republican Party under Donald Trump.
Why don't we just start to say it has devolved into a cult? Primary voters in the Republican Party have devolved into a Trumpist cult.
Right. The Republican Party becoming more like a cult than a political party. Boy, that's hard news for the Republicans. You're in a cult. This is Jonestown.
Donald Trump is accused of leading a cult. You're forced to go along with the whims of Trump to believe that something like CNN is more of a threat than North Korea.
Now, some are pegging the word to retiring Senator Bob Corker, who said this to reporters.
It's almost, it's becoming a cultish thing, isn't it? It's not a good place for any party to end up with a cult-like situation.
Except that some pundits were using the word well before that. Joining us now, Emily Jasinski, commentary writer for the Washington Examiner and New York. Kathy Aru, publisher of Catalina Magazine and a former Washington Post magazine editor. Emily, this is the new four-letter C word. Many in the media adopting this label that the Republican Party is, in fact, some kind of Trumpian cult. What does that tell you about the journalistic mindset?
Well, I think there's some glee that Bob Corker gave them the language, that this language is out there and it exists. And I think that there is a need for some perspective, and that, do I believe there's a little bit too much deference to the president? Absolutely. But a lot of this started with the Mark Sanford results in the election. He got 46% of the vote in a state that President Trump is pretty popular in a Republican primary. So I think it's too early to say that there's some sort of cult around Donald Trump. I think it's short-sighted. And so I think it's interesting that the media is so excited to latch onto this.
And Kathy, the Washington Post op-ed page uses it today. But even well before Corker, I did a little Google search. New York Times editorial last week, the cult of Trump. Axios in February, the cult of Trump. National Journal last year, Trump's cult overwhelms the GOP. Your thoughts on that word?
Yeah, I guess it's hard with the chicken and the egg here. So I guess the press did it first. But the GOP has jumped on it, so now everyone's kind of owning this word. And Trump does have followers as if it were a cult. But journalists, right-leaning journalist George Will was talking to Bill Maher about this, and he was describing it as maybe not so much of a cult as a culture of fear. So it's interesting that now journalists have taken the word cult, and now they're dissecting it and analyzing it and take it to the next level. Right. Is it really a cult? Now what is it? So we might have a brand new word. We're moving away from the C word and moving to another word. So I think journalists are taking it to the next level.
Yeah, you know, Emily, I don't have any problem with the underlying analysis that most in the GOP now blindly follow this president either because they agree with him or because they fear him or fear losing their jobs or they flip-flopped on certain, hot-button issues. But when you think about this word cult, I mean, it suggests, it's spooky. Yes. It's a cult of people who are in it must be mindless and delusional. And yet the media perfectly comfortable in using this in relation to Trump.
That's exactly it's what it implies about the Republicans. And what's so interesting about this is a president who's actually really popular with Republican voters, and they have to answer, the politicians in this alleged cult have to answer to Republican voters. So just logically, of course, again, I think there's too much deference sometimes, but it makes sense. And to keep that in perspective is I think the media is more excited to use this pejoratively towards Republican politicians than to actually look at what's going on.